Canine Detection Collaborative, a detection dog training trio with Stacy Barnett.
Hi.
Robin Greubel.
Hey there.
And Crystal Wing.
What's up?
With humor and a big dose of theory, our trio talks practical training advice and features interviews with top trainers and scientists. It's Canine Detection Collaborative.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canine Detection Collaborative. I am Robin Greubel, and I am here with one of my co-hosts, Crystal Wing.
Hello.
And I'm super excited to have Jens Frank from the Scandinavian Working Dog Institute here with us today, who is, I might make him blush. He is one of my training gurus that when I need inspiration on what and how to train, I pull up his stuff and typically am like, maybe when I grow up someday, I can be like that. So Jens, it's great that you're joining us.
Thank you, Robin. You're far too nice, but it's good to be here.
Excellent.
I feel the same. Following you on the Scandinavian Working Dog Institute on Facebook, it's just your work is so brilliant. And then with Robin having the opportunity that you came here all the way to Des Moines, Iowa, of all places, and to actually get to meet you and
yes.
I'm like starstruck. So yay, Jens.
No, that was very fun.
Yes, that was fun. It was a little, actually it was really nice. It was, we were here in Iowa in February and it decided to be 54 degrees that week. Who knew? Yeah, it was very odd. So Jens, how did you get to where you're at? And what does the Scandinavian Working Dog Institute do?
So the Scandinavian Working Dog Institute is loosely linked to the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. So I did my PhD there and I have been working there for the last 25 years. And I'm still having a position there as an associate professor at the Department of Ecology. And what the university does is it encourages us to start institutes so we can bud off into the real world from the university, whether it's drugs for veterinary use or for human medical purpose or dog training procedures. They want us to interact with the surrounding society, but in the university we should do research and some teaching of university students, but courses and some development projects for police or military is not really fitting in to what we do at the university. So that's why the university wants us to create these institutes that are run more or less like a company, which allows us great freedom to do what we want with whom we want. And that way we learn a lot about what is needed from the end users. And then we can try to do research that comes to their help so that we don't get to stay in our bubble and do research that just interests us.
We had talked when you were here that the Institute is kind of like the extension model that we have in the United States, where faculty go out and work with practitioners to be that link between science and practice. And so that was one of those, I didn't pick that up right away when I started following SWDI like 6 years ago. And so I think that is really important. And then so you were at the university, and what's kind of the bread and butter of SWDI?
So our bread and butter is police, and so the regular police and the regular military working dogs. And for different, more or less random reasons, we also do a lot of work with different special forces, dog teams in different parts of the world. So I would say that's our bread and butter. But now and then we do courses and longer programs also for civilians and for other companies. And right now, we're working on a research project on soil pollutants. And it's actually the Swedish government who has asked for this project and funded it, where they want to see if it's possible to use dogs to screen larger areas to find soil pollutants that, if you build houses there, will cause illness and death of people living in these houses. But running around with the PIDs electric noses measuring, it takes too long time to find these hotspots because there are so many old industrial areas where these soil pollutants have been used. So we did that first part of the project where we showed that the dogs can reliably detect the soil pollutants down under the threshold levels. And then in the last part of it, which we are in right now, we had the task to select and train 3 operational dog teams who are currently working with this. So that has been very interesting.
Do you train them on very specific chemicals, or is it a cocktail of chemicals?
No, it's very specific chemicals, because the authorities and companies that work with this want to know which chemical it is. And
Interesting.
And then it's easier to train the dogs, different dogs, on different chemicals. We have done some other work with large carnivores where we have a secondary indication. So the dog first finds a track, and then when the dog has indicated with a passive indication that there is a track on the ground, we have made, it's like cones made of textile, so you can fold them and have in your pocket. And then we put 3 cones in front of the dog, and then I say, mark. And then the dog goes and grabs one of these 3 textile cones that represents either lynx, brown bear, or wolf tracks. Because there we want to find a track, and we want to know which species it is before we then decide whether to follow it. But that is more time-consuming training, and it's hard to get perfectly reliable.
I was going to say that just made my head hurt a little bit. That you're so basically you're asking a dog a multiple choice question and asking it to match to sample. And,
exactly. And first we tried to make the dogs indicate with the first indication. So if it was a bear track, it should bark. If it was a wolf track, it should sit and stare. If it was a lynx track, it should down and stare. But that was never reliable. So then we tested with a secondary indication instead. And that was far easier to get reliable, but it was never easy. So when the dog has been searching for 3 or 4 kilometers in the forest for track and finds it, it is hard to get it to 100 times out of 100 correctly indicate which species the track is from.
What reliability were you getting? Can I ask that?
Yes, you can. That is not a secret in any way. So it depended if it was short. So if it was below 100 meters that the dog had been searching, then it was 100 out of 100. But as soon as we passed that, it got lower and lower. And these dogs typically have to search between 1 and 5 kilometers. And when they did that, we were down at about 80%.
Wow.
Correct.
That's still I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's still pretty good in my brain. So,
Yeah, but from applied view,
it's not.
It's not. No.
Right. So when you were here in February, one of the sort of brain altering discussions that that you proposed and we were having is the difference between arousal and drive. And then that kind of led and was talking about how you select dogs for detection work. So can you talk about a little bit how you select dogs and what you look for, and then the differences, maybe some indicators we can talk about it's arousal, not drive.
Yeah, for that, you'll probably definitely want to define what you see in both of those. Because we had a nice conversation, I thought, at dinner, talking about the bitey dogs. And so that's where I want to go with it.
Yes, that is very interesting, and I think very important. And unfortunately, I don't have all the answers. The way I see it, when we use the term drive, what we mean is motivation. And motivation is often quite specific. So that way we blur things a bit when we say drive, because when we say that can be anything. It can be motivation for a ball, it can be motivation for food or water or interaction with humans or other dogs. So I think it's good to be as specific as we can when we talk about motivation. What is it the dog should be motivated for? And typically when it comes to working dogs, I would say most authorities or companies that select dogs want dogs who are motivated to retrieve items like balls or other toys. You want a dog who is motivated to play tug with you. You want a dog who is motivated to just carry the toy as well. And we can call these all things of all kinds of drives. We can try to put it in something like prey drive and those things, but it is different sorts of motivations for different primary reinforcers that we are after. And then we have arousal, and I would say typically working dog handlers look for dogs who have a high motivation and low arousal. And arousal would then be level of excitement. So you can be very excited without being particularly motivated in a particular direction. You can be just very excited and aroused. And you can be very motivated to do something in particular without being very excited. And excitement is hard to measure, I find. It's something where we more often make subjective judgments of the dog spinning or I don't know,
happy feet.
Tripping?
Yeah, we call them happy feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Robin doesn't know anything about that with Sheba.
Yeah, Sheba has happy feet. Yes.
Yes, many Labradors do this kind of dance. It's very charming.
And that's a word.
For it. And so to try to be more concrete, we can test for motivation. And the typical test that most units around the world use is that you first put the primary reinforcer, can be the favorite ball or tug for the dog, in a specific place, like around cars or in a building or in a field of high grass. And then you let the dog search and find it, and then you play with the dog, and you do it the second time, let the dog find it, and play with the dog. And then the third time, you pretend to place the item in the same place where the dog has found it, or not in the exact same spot, but in the same general area of maybe 100 square meters. And then you want to see how motivated is the dog to search for this toy or tug, because that is your measure of the dog's motivation for the primary reinforcer, and the dog will not be more motivated to search for narcotics or explosives than it is to search for its primary reinforcer. We use the narcotics or explosives or whatever it is kind of as the secondary reinforcer for the dog. It's the way to the primary reinforcer. So if the dog is not willing or motivated to search for the ball in 5 minutes, we are not really likely to get the dog to search for something that means nothing to the dog for more than 5 minutes. So that way we can measure motivation more objectively.
At what age are you typically doing that examination for the dogs you're looking for? Do you have certain age ranges you like, or is it totally dog dependent? Or does it depend on the job?
Both yes and no. So typically, if it's a regular police or military working dog or detection dog, it would be when the dog is between 1 and 2 years old, because then you have the x-rays made. You know that the dog is healthy. And that's good to know before we start to invest a lot of time in training. We can find younger dogs who are very motivated for the primary reinforcer. Then that usually stays that way, but then we have the risk of them being ill, or the x-rays showing that they have some skeletal problems later on.
And are you building the drive at all for the primary reinforcer, or is this like the first time they've seen this ball and now they think that the ball is happiness? Like, how do you determine that it's a primary reinforcer?
So the definition of a primary reinforcer is that it is innate. If you have to teach the dog the value of the reinforcer, then it is by definition secondary reinforcer. So all primary reinforcers are things that the dog is born with. It's not really possible to build the drive. We can use deprivation to make it a little bit stronger. So if the dog is today not motivated to work for food, if we don't feed it for 7 days, it will be more motivated to work for a piece of sausage. And we can do it the same with toys. We don't let the dog use the toys. We don't play with the dog for some days, so that we limit the excess and use deprivation. But it's not really possible to build the drive for the primary reinforcers. We can let the dog express the drive. And this is something I find is hard to communicate. So let's say, for example, I buy a 1-year-old Malinois or working line Labrador that has been in a pet home, and they think this is a problematic dog. It creates all kinds of problems. And they have been trying now for 1 year, since the dog was a pup, to make the dog calm, just rewarding with food, not letting it play any intense games. And this is not uncommon, unfortunately, or fortunately for people like me. Because what happens then when I buy that dog is that in 2 or 3 weeks, the dog is not problematic at all. Because going then from a dog that has been just rewarded with food, never allowed to play tug or bite sleeves or chase a ball repeatedly, when I let the dog do that, it quickly gets normal for the dog to do that in the context where it's interacting with me or doing obedience or indication and detection. So it may then look like to me that I'm building the dog's drive. But that is not really possible because it is an innate motivation, and because otherwise it isn't a primary reinforcer. So I may think that I'm building the drive, but I'm just allowing the dog to express this motivation. And it will, for some weeks, grow stronger and stronger because the dog appreciates this and it learns that, yes, I am really allowed to do this, finally. So then, since we as humans tend to overestimate our own effect on things, I may think, yeah, look what I did. I built the drive in this dog. But really, I didn't.
It seems like a lot of trainers, whether they recognize it or not, that it is kind of a power thing, that they have the control over the dog. And it's been something that's been interesting in my mind, because exactly what you said, you're giving the dog the opportunity to fulfill their drives, to fulfill their motivations. And manipulating those drives is where that kind of power comes in on our side. And it seems like there's a shift in the world, kind of the landscape of training, where it went from a lot of I'm telling you what to do to now it's more positive reinforcement sort of style. And I think that that's also something kind of twisting my mind a little about how some people are kind of losing sight of using arousal and using drive because they're not able to control the dog as much in a different way. My friend Susan and I were talking about a lot about that, and it made me think about that a bit. I don't know. Have you seen a shift of, like, have you had a lot of experience with traditional type of you're going to do what I say training, and then the transition into more of like what you're doing?
Yes, I have seen some of that. If I go back to the initial question and try to build my way up until what you were saying now, and let's see if you're pleased with that or if we should go on.
Just spending time with you, Jens. I'm pleased.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm
good. So that you can check that box.
We need a dog that has as many primary reinforcers as possible. The more, the merrier. So if we have a dog for whom a primary reinforcer is to chase the ball or the toy, that's perfect. If it is a dog who has as a primary reinforcer to retrieve objects, that's very good. If it's also likes to just carry them, and it's reinforcing for the dog just to carry it in its mouth, which it is for many dogs. And if it also has the motivation to come to me and play, do tug of war, that is also a primary reinforcer. And if it also wants to have food and so on, the more, the better. I mean, the most difficult thing is if we have a dog that just enjoys biting the sleeve of the decoy. Then if that is the only primary reinforcer we have access to, it will take a lot of time to get that dog to do obedience and all other things, because we need to carry a decoy wherever we go in order to be able to reward the dog.
That's a great visual.
It will be, it will be practically difficult. And it will also be difficult then to start at the low arousal level with the training, because the decoy is a big and very fun toy to play with for the dog. So in selection, we want to select dogs who have as high motivation as possible for as many primary reinforcers as possible. But I would say what I and most others are looking for is a dog that has as a primary reinforcer to chase a ball when you throw it and to retrieve a ball or another toy, because that opens up for us playing tug with the dog. So at least these three. And if I can wish, if I have two dogs where they have the same amount of motivation for chasing, retrieving, and playing tug, but one dog is also crazy for food, I will of course go with the one that is crazy for food as well, because it brings us more options. Because arousal, I will try not to dive into a rabbit hole here, but we cannot.
Let's go. Let's
Just-
go.
Welcome. Go. Because actually one of the questions that we have is how do you evaluate whether it's arousal or it's drive? And so maybe we're going to hit that on the rabbit hole.
Yes. The only evaluation that I know of is very blunt, and that would be the time or effort, but I measure it as time that the dog is motivated to search for its primary reinforcer, the favorite toy, the number of minutes. So objectively, I would say most authorities has as a threshold that the dog should search for at least 5 minutes without having any contact, taking any contact with its handler. If the dog is not able to do that, there's a lot of information in that, and rarely, I think, will those dogs make good working dogs if they are not able to search for at least 5 minutes. Then the longer the better. And the arousal, I have no such objective measurements of. Maybe someone has, I don't. So for me, I'm then left with a subjective way of just seeing how much the dog is bouncing or spinning or running.
Or screaming.
So, or screaming. But that would, in most selection tests, also be a criteria. The dog should not be vocal for most working roles. So, yeah, it's just a subjective measure. How excited is the dog? And typically, I would prefer a dog that is as little excited as possible. So if I have to choose from 10 dogs that will search 10 minutes for their favorite toy, and I can only choose one, I would select the dog who is searching with the lowest level of arousal or excitement. But clearly the motivation to keep on searching is there, because the dog is all the time searching. It's not trying to contact me or the handler or get any help or start chasing squirrels or birds or something like that.
You also said about retrieving, tugging, and carrying. So do you feel like the 5-minute search also is indicative of those behaviors?
No, not necessarily.
So the searching is more important though. And if they have that, then you assess the tugging, the carrying, the retrieving?
Yes. So you can have a Labrador that is motivated to search for 5 minutes. And then all it wants you to do is to throw the ball so that it can retrieve it. Even if it doesn't want to make any tugging or chasing or carrying, it just wants to get the ball and drop it in front of you so you can throw it. I don't see any.
Is that a dog you would pick?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Not if I don't have to. So I would prefer a dog then who from the start also wants to do tugging, or where I can see that when I stimulate it a bit with tugging, it starts to see that, yes, I am actually allowed to trash the toys a bit, because many retrievers have been trained since they were small that they are not allowed to bite hard.
Mm-hmm.
But the more primary reinforcers we have to work with, the easier the work will be later on. So,
and did you say, is this in a new environment that they're searching, or is this one that they already know?
No, that will be a new environment.
Okay.
But the environmentals is, I don't test the environmentals with that. I only test the motivation. So if the dog has issues just doing something, whatever, in a new environment, I would not select that dog.
Yeah.
because that makes everything so difficult.
Yes, for sure. But you said you wanted the lower arousal and the higher drive. And we kind of talked about how for like precision obedience and the bitey sports where they want all the prancy prance, that maybe people would want higher arousal for that. And what is the difference that you see? Like, why is the higher arousal for that better? Or maybe more preferred for some people?
I think in order to get the really snappy behaviors that are very quick and look good, I think it is more often easier to get that with the dog that is both highly motivated and a bit aroused, because they move to snappier, sharper, or quicker movements than a dog that has a low arousal but is very motivated. It can be very determined to get to the end stage, but it's not very excited.
Kind of the difference between a Ferrari and a Tahoe in my world.
Yes. That's
depends on the destination and the terrain, I guess.
Yes,
but on the highway versus off-road.
Right. But
so it makes you think about nose work, because in nose work, do you want a mid or a higher arousal with a high drive because they're under such a time crunch? Or would you want to have a lower arousal that they would find the things more efficiently and not be so maybe hectic to do it? What do you think about that?
I think the lower arousal would be more functional. But then again, I have no experience from nose work.
Yeah.
So I may be totally wrong. But my experience from other dogs is that the low aroused dogs typically find targets quicker and more reliable than the higher aroused dogs.
There's a brain tickle for you. Because that was something that I've had conversation with people that have said, I want the higher arousal because I want them to go in and search the area as fast as possible to clear it as fast as possible. And then I've had other people say that they're a little less aroused dog would be able to find it faster because they weren't missing areas and they were more focused on what they needed to do.
Yeah, I think then they may be at the risk of mixing motivation and arousal. So if the dog is moving quick, it does not really say anything about the dog's motivation to find. It can just be excited to run around and just cover a lot of area.
Yeah.
While a dog that is very motivated to find because it knows that this is my only way to maybe have a chance to be reinforced, it can be very motivated to do this, but move quite slow and systematic. And I would say if it's large scent pictures, so if the odor is very large and easy for the dog to find, which it I think is in nose work with the oils that are very volatile, then you would probably benefit from a dog that covers a lot of area because it will quicker run into a place where it gets into the scent cloud. Whereas a dog that is sniffing for small scent pictures would more reliably find those, but it would take a longer time before it hits this big scent cloud.
And so I remember you talking about the Yerkes-Dodson and how that kind of relied or, was arousal and drive. Is that something that you want to kind of share again? Since, you talked about it in Iowa and not with everybody here, in case you haven't heard about it.
With arousal and drive?
It was the Yerkes-Dodson, the little bell curve that you had kind of talked about.
Yes, the new research from 1908.
Yes, the new stuff.
Yes. The very brand new stuff, yes.
And just to see if there's anything new out there that you have kind of been following or, just to kind of, go to that too, the science side of it. Thanks.
Yes. So it's the It's called the Yerkes-Dodson Law of Optimal Arousal Levels, and it was published in 1908. And they were investigating humans, but it has been replicated since, also during the last 10 years in other studies. And basically, this is not rocket science. I think it's, like most good science, it is common sense. So what they showed was that when you are to learn a new task, that is of course difficult, because everything is difficult before you know it. And then the optimal arousal level is typically lower than when you do something that you can do, which is easy for you. Then you will, in general, perform better if you do it at a higher arousal level. So they have these two inverted bell-shaped curves, where far to the left of the x-axis you have the lower arousal, and then the further right on the x-axis you go, there is an increase in the arousal level, and on the y-axis they have performance. And I think most of us know that when we teach a new behavior, we should start in a low state of arousal. And that makes sense in many ways. But what I really think that this model helps us with is that it makes it visual, that we need to move from the low arousal to the high arousal, because all working dogs will work under a state of high arousal. Almost always. It's inevitable. And what I find is that the arousal level is also a context for the dog. If the dog can heel 200 meters in low arousal, and then all of a sudden we add screaming and shooting and people running and bleeding or whatever, this tends to increase the arousal level in the dog. And then all of a sudden, although it has been healing perfectly well under low arousal, it gets out of position when the handler is healing in such an environment. Just because the arousal level goes up, and then it's like the dog has never done this, although we have done it hundreds of times. But in the new arousal level, it is a new context, so the dog actually has never done this. And it may seem like the dog is disobedient, but it has actually never done this. And I find that especially in police and military, they often fall into this trap of going from doing healing, sit down, and these kind of obedience exercises on a green grass field, and then doing it in a more applied setting where people are shooting, shouting, and the handler is running. And then you're going from very low to very high arousal. And what we need to do is, in small increments, build arousal. But it's so comfortable to stay in the low arousal where you just feed the dog when you're rewarding it, because the dog is calm, you have control. But it's just a waste of time when it works in low arousal.
And I feel like that goes back to what I was kind of asking earlier, kind of thinking about, is that people like that control. And so that's why they keep it in the low arousal. And I feel like I'm really enjoying that, because dogs are thrill seekers and we're thrill seekers. And it's that line between, is it too much? Is it too little? Like that little volume knob is just right in the right spot where it can be messy. It is sometimes, like it's not perfect all the time. I love some of the videos you shared, and, how you were so willing to show that, these are the mistakes that happen. And then, because that's what dog training is, but then we can kind of turn it down a little to be successful. I love that thrill seeking line of, how can I push the arousal to the right spot? And I think some people feel they get too out of control doing that. So I love that you said that we are comfortable in having our dogs stay in low arousal. That was a big moment for me just now.
Yeah. Aha.
Yeah, that it is an actual problem, because a lot of training time is wasted to do what the dog already knows how to do. Not only when it comes to pushing the challenge of the behaviors, but increasing the arousal level. It is a significant factor that we need to take into account. And I think the important thing is to see, so typically this shows maybe the most when we practice out on a decoy, for example, then it shows quickest. Because the first time, if I send the dog to bite and out, the out is maybe at least very good.
Yeah,
and
that
then
feels good.
Yes,
it feels good.
I reward the dog by letting it bite a second time. And then 2 minutes of the training session has passed. The dog's heart rate has gone up. And typically that increases the level of arousal. So now after 2 minutes of just pure fun, I ask the dog once again to out. And then it's showing a little bit more reluctant to do the behavior. And then if I still reward the dog for outing, I will have rewarded a out that I actually don't want to see more of. So there it is better to realize that, okay, now I have passed the peak of this inverted bell-shaped curve that Yerkes-Dodson produced 100 years ago. Now I need to put the dog back into the car, wait 10 minutes before we do the next session, because otherwise this will be a slippery slope where the behaviors get worse, but I still will continue to reinforce them. And then it's better to put the dog back into the car, let the arousal go down, and then we can start there the next time.
So do you have ways that you are able to teach the dogs how to bring themselves up in arousal and then back down? Or is it just time that you feel is one of the best?
No, I don't. I think that is too messy and complicated. I don't even try. I don't think we I don't think we can reinforce emotions. I don't see how that is possible. We can reinforce behaviors that we interpret as an emotion. But to reinforce an emotion is extremely difficult.
It's interesting because you said that, and I think of Sheba, who is Little Miss Happy Feet. Even when sitting, she tap dances with her front feet. So a sit has actually had to become your feet can't move. And I can reinforce that behavior, knowing sometimes that either helps calm her or it may be making her more aroused. And I just have to kind of feel that out. So it's interesting how we very much want to think about reinforcing behaviors, but what we need to concentrate on are the behaviors that we're reinforcing.
Yeah, I think so, because otherwise our reinforcements or punishments will be very inconsistent, because we're not very good probably at interpreting the emotions of the dog. We see the behavior, we interpret an emotion, but we never get to know when we are doing the correct or when we're doing the false interpretation, which makes us getting no better at it, because we never get to know when we were right and when we were not.
And I know you made Nancy and my head hurt, because one of the things you said here in Des Moines was about the reinforcement, because we tend to go, well, they outed, so I'm still going to give them a reinforcement because they did finally do it. Yeah, they did a little chompy, it was hard. And that was information that it was hard. And when you said that you would prefer to not reward them for that, because now you're going to reinforce the out that you didn't want, or you're going to reinforce whatever behavior it is. That was just the recent one we just said, that it was better not to reinforce it than it was to reinforce it. Both Nancy and I looked at each other like, because we want to reinforce effort sometimes. And you were like, no, stop it. So I don't know if if you'd want to talk about that a little. That'd be really helpful again to hear.
Yes. So if we then jump back to detection, this is an interesting question that I meet everywhere. We are all considering how to reinforce effort or searching. And my current standpoint, at least, it may change if I get other experiences, but for now, I would not reward the dog when it's searching or sniffing very intense. And because I can understand that, now I see you sniffing with a closed mouth, with a very high sniffing frequency. This is a behavior I want to see more of. So I want to reinforce this. I can understand that. But dogs have a mental capacity that is equivalent to that of a 2-year-old human child. And if we are to take that, depart from that fact, it will probably be very hard for us to communicate to the dog that the reason why I clicked now was because you had your mouth closed and was sniffing intensely, because the dog is doing a whole chain of other behaviors as well. It's looking, it's listening, it's moving its feet and its entire body. It's having contact with nose or shoulder with whatever it's searching. It's very much to ask that the dog should understand that it's reinforced for what we hope to reinforce. So where I am right now, I tend to not do that. So if I want the dog, for example, to search with a proper technique, closed mouth in a high sniffing frequency, I try to do that by back chaining. So I make the scent picture or odor picture small enough so that the dog will not find it unless it is searching with a closed mouth and high sniffing frequency. And when it's finding, it has the chance of being rewarded. So then that way I can make sure that the dog is only rewarded for doing the behavior that I want to see more of. While if we have large targets for the dog to search for, the dog can search with a sloppy behavior and still find and be rewarded. And then that is what we get more of.
If we translate that to obedience, so if I want my dog to have a fast, reliable sit, then I want to control my environment to create the easiest way for them to be able to do that. And if they don't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to reward that, even though they did sit, but instead I will manipulate my environment or figure out some other way to have that happen. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? And then I can reward the perfect one instead of the lesser.
Yes, that is one part of it. And also that we need to pay attention to the dog's response. So what I think the dog should understand that it's reinforced for, it's not very interesting. What is interesting is the response we see in the dog. If we get to see more of a specific behavior, then we know this has been reinforced. And my job is to try to set the situation for the dog up in a way that it has the chance to be reinforced for the behavior we want to see more of. And with the detection, that would then be not by clicking when the dog is showing this behavior among many other behaviors and expect that the dog should read my mind and understand which behaviors are important to me and thus also to it. But by making the target small enough so the dog has to use the very specific behavior that I am after. When we get lost is maybe when we get very stuck in certain training methodologies.
Well, and the other problem is our dogs reward us all the time because they are so smart and they learn stuff despite us, it feels like. And when you said that they, didn't need to read our mind, I feel like sometimes my dog does read my mind. I'm like, wow, I don't know how you made that leap. I don't know how you figured that out, but yay you, and here we go. They're just incredible.
Yeah.
We're going to pause right there and pick up next week with the last half of the interview that we had with Jens Frank, where we're going to talk about what he wishes handlers would know, the whole concept of reliability or proficiency, and how you set your hides might be showing your lack of imagination, and a few other things and tidbits of wisdom from Jens. Please join us next week in the next episode.
Canine Detection Collaborative! We appreciate the time you spend with us. If you liked this episode, not only should you follow us so you don't miss the next one, but please also rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. For info on collaborating with us, go to k9detectioncollaborative.com. That's K9detectioncollaborative.com, where you can find our socials and pick up our latest monthly freebie. Join us again to talk training in the next episode.